everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Now, many of you are celebrating Columbus Day. Of course, the left is trying to rebrand this as Indigenous People Day. But we want you to know that today we're doing the real land acknowledgement. We're celebrating this with the true land acknowledgement by, of course, reading Nick Land. So we've moved our Schizo Friday reading into Monday for this special occasion, just so we could make this Columbus Day joke. Joining me today to continue our reading of Nick Land's seminal essay, Meltdown, is the Prudentialist. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Auron. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. There's nobody else I'd rather be reading insane philosophy with than you, of course, sir.
Let's see how well we can get through these words.
Yeah, I think we're actually going to make it to the end this time. There's a lot of, remember, for people who are unfamiliar or, jumping into this in the third episode here, I highly encourage you to go back and watch the previous two. You can listen to what we're going to read here, but the context that we've laid out in previous videos is going to be very important. Land is somebody who is building a vocabulary that is itself already obscure when you don't know, or when you know the references, when you're familiar with all of the context. But without it, it becomes increasingly more difficult as we get along. He's going to be referencing back to things that he was talking about at the beginning of the essay. So if you don't have that context, again, it becomes a little difficult to navigate. But I think we're going to be able to get to the end of this one here, because he gets deep into the theory fiction. The way that Land sometimes writes these pieces is as if he's kind of writing half of a sci-fi story along with the philosophical underpinnings. And so you get a lot of kind of just descriptive kind of neuromancer, Blade Runner style imagery, along with the different things that we're trying to unpack. So we're going to jump into all of that, guys. But before we do, let me tell you a little bit about today's sponsor. Hey, guys, I'm sure you know that your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food that you eat into fuel that keeps you going. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates into a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. Personally, I found it super easy to use. When you wake up in the morning, you just breathe into the Lumen, and the app on the phone tells you what ratio of carbs versus fat you're burning. Then it'll give you suggestions on how to tailor your diet to improve your metabolism. I really like that it also tracks your shift before and after a workout, so you can understand how effective your exercise has been. You can track all of your macros in the app, and it serves as a great motivator that allows you to see your results and adjust your plan to optimize your metabolism. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/Auron and use the promo code Auron to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Auron. And use Auron at checkout to get 15% off. All right, so let's jump into Nick Land's Meltdown, and we will pause to unpack this essay as we go. Picking up where we left off last time, Land is talking about the idea of fighting against what is happening. Can humanity stop this process? Is there any way that they can arrest this deterritorialization of their cultures into the marketplace, kind of the global commercium, as he explains it, if there's an option there? And so he's going to quote what is often considered kind of the ground level quote from Deleuze and Guattari when it comes to accelerationism. I want to make it very clear for people who are unfamiliar with Nick Land that his accelerationism is not kind of the really dumb political radical option that a lot of people talk about, like we got to make the world worse, we got to do terrible acts so that things get worse. That's not what he is talking about. He is talking about the technological acceleration and the way in which that is going to affect kind of the future of humanity. So this is kind of the core verse, I guess, if you will, for both left and right acceleration, though he's obviously going to take it in the rightward direction. So quoting Meltdown here, which is quoting Deleuze and Guattari and Anti-Oedipus, is there one to withdraw from the, or I guess I should start reading up here. Hot revolution, which is the revolutionary path? Deleuze and Guattari ask, is there one to withdraw from the world market, as Samir Amin advises third world countries to do? in a curious reversal of the fascist economic solution? Or might it go into the opposite direction, to go still further, that is, in the movement of the market, of decoding and deterritorialization? For perhaps the flows are not yet deterritorialized enough, not decoded enough, from the viewpoint of a theory and practice of a highly schizophrenic character. Not to withdraw from the process, but to go further, to accelerate the process. As Nietzsche put it, in this matter, the truth is we haven't seen anything yet. So again, this is kind of the core paragraph from Anti-Oedipus for both left and right accelerationists who say, look, the process of deterritorialization, the process of decoding the flows, the things that many people on the left and some people on the right think are positive, that we're breaking down old social codes, old social formations, old institutions, and we're putting them and re-territorializing them into this commercial space. He says, for many Marxists, they say, oh, well, that's bad. We like the part where it breaks you out of this old mode of being, but we don't like this part where everything is now governed by kind of this commercial enterprise, by capital. But of course, Deleuze and Guattari point to this, and Land by proxy point to the solution where perhaps actually the key is not to fight this process. Maybe the process can't be fought. Instead, you can go deeper into it. You can accelerate the process, and perhaps by further decoding, further breaking down these social structures, you can get to a solution or something so radically different that it no longer cares about the problems.
Yeah, like you said, this is one of those seminal quotes that has been picked apart by so many friends on the right, but as well as some of our, I guess, enemies on the left as well. I don't want to, because sometimes you read them and they're like, oh, you're so close, but you're so far off, because they'll want to accelerate and punch right through it. And it's as if we've witnessed, and you've talked about this a lot within your book and in your speeches that you've been in at conferences, is that the deterritorialization part has been really nailed down, I think, by the late and great Sam Francis. That we've witnessed a blob, commodify and kitschify identity and culture to where you are so deterritorialized and decoded from the land. It's funny, we open with this land acknowledgement joke, but I mean, if you talk about identity, I mean, it's a great important thing to point out is that for a lot of places in the United States, outside of those who still really care about their community, who are active in it, regions have become just consumer identities, whether it be football or baseball teams. For a lot of people who've moved to Texas, the idea of Texas is the Mavericks, it's HEB, it's Buc-ee's, it's Whataburger. It's not, the Alamo, it's not Sam Houston, it's not any of those things, because it's easier to commodify a brand or a consumer identity and to uproot you from a land, a people, and a culture. And I mean, that's sort of the preeminent question by a lot of these right and left theorists is, well, how do you break out of a cycle that has constantly advocated for your destruction? Not just on a biological level, but I mean on a historical, economic level on all fronts. And, for Land, we're going to break this down into some weird theory fiction because it's 1994. I'm teaching and there's probably a lot of drugs involved, but we're here for a good time nonetheless.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is important for people to recognize this process, right? As you point out, Sam Francis and others have recognized this and used different language. Land is in many ways celebrating this. In many ways, the Deleuze-Guattarians or even the Marxists would celebrate portions of this. They like the fact that old ways of life are dying, old institutions, old identities are dying. For many of us who don't like that, we say, actually, this process is deleterious to the human, which is actually something Land sees as a positive, that it's destroying what humanity was and remaking humanity into something different and possibly better for him, as where guys like Francis would say, actually, the destruction of these identities is going to ultimately make people miserable. It's going to, we should be preferencing the human over others. And then there's, oftentimes this kind of quasi-Marxist, but also, quasi modern American right perspective of like, no, it's good to a certain degree. Like, we do want the deterritorialization. We do want the old ways destroyed, but we don't want like the consequences of this entirely consumer culture. Like we want half of this kind of economic plan, but not the results of it. And so whether you agree with this process or not, whether you would like to see it accelerated or not, whether you'd like to fight against it or not, the fact that multiple different theoreticians have approached this idea and seen this idea from different perspectives, whether they oppose it or they support it, is important. It's significant. It means this is a real phenomenon that is happening and needs to be grappled with. Whether you have your answer on this may vary, but if you're going to be an effective political movement, you need to have an answer to this question.
Yeah, let's carry on.
Back to our reading here. A convergent anti-authoritarianism emerges, labeled by tags such as meltdown acceleration, Siberian invasion, schizotechnics, K-tactics, bottom-up bacterial welfare, efficient neo-nihilism, voodoo anti-humanism, synthetic feminization, rhizomatics, connectionism, I don't know if that's Kwang, contagion, viral amnesia, microinsurgency, winter mutation, neotropy, dissipatory proliferation, and lesbian vampirism, among other designations frequently pornographic, abusive, or terroristic in nature. This massively distributed matrix network tendency is oriented into a disabling of ROM command control programs, sustaining all macro and micro governmental entities, globally concentrating themselves as the human security system. So there's a lot of what seem like made up words there. Some of it is verbiage from Deleuze and Guattari. Some of it is just from general postmodern leftism. Some of it is specific to the CCRU, which Land was a key member of. But all of it is, as he pointed out, supposed to be anti-authoritarian. It's supposed to be attacking these human security systems that Land keeps referencing. The ROM, command control, that he keeps talking about. What's supposed to be this hardwired limitation on the capital process that is supposed to contain it and keep it from exploding and doing what it's doing now. All of this stuff is going to be dismantled by these different micro attacks on traditional human stratification, traditional social organization. And so eventually you get the kind of this global human security system because it's basically abandoning all these previous beachheads of human control, of human identity, and kind of retreating back to the last defensible unit, which a lot of people would recognize as global managerialism. And so what we see over and over again, him hinting at here way back in the 1990s, is this idea that all of these radical kind of political ideologies will mainly be used to break down these different human security systems against this deterritorialization process.
Yeah, and a lot of this does sound like, as Auron had pointed out, that these are some fun science fiction terms, so they certainly sound like it, whether it be, like lesbian vampirism or whatever, although I think there's plenty of that happening right now in today's day and age. Like viral amnesia is a fun one, because a lot of these things that you could look at, and if you understand some of the context for it, like K-tactics, of course, in reference to other accelerationist texts, has a lot to do with time. But I mean, viral amnesia is perfect, because you see that already as it is. Our current mechanisms of technology being integrated to us allows us to forget headlines in a rapid fire succession. I mean, this is why, people will be like, hey, do you remember when such and such thing happened? And then it's, you try and look it up, and it only happened just a few months ago, but it has entirely been wiped out of the public consciousness if you're online, or if you're anyone who's paying attention to, say, mainstream press and media. I mean, President Trump has had, 2 people try and take a shot at him. They had a third one that was recently arrested at some rally. And again, the photo that everyone wants to point out from the whole fight thing, it's not as popular as, say, in the past, where historical images would have more value, because we've accelerated the timeline in which how we perceive and consume information. I mean, you see this joke on Twitter a lot where people will say nothing ever happens. And that's sort of this like psychic self-defense mechanism of, I'm not going to let this new piece of information affect me. It's the kind of a psychic warfare against a machine that wants to decode and deterritorialize your mind.
Absolutely. And we'll get into K-tactics here in a little bit, because he's going to mention that again, and I think it's worth unpacking for people what that means, because it's important, though a little confusing. Scientific intelligence is already massively artificial. Even before AI arrives in the lab, it arrives itself by way of artificial life. Where formalist AI is incremental and progressive, caged in the pre-specified databases and processing routines of expert systems, connectionist or anti-formalist AI is explosive and opportunistic, engineering time. It breaks out non-locally across intelligence networks that are technical but no longer technological, since they elude both theory dependency and behavioral predictability. No one knows what to expect. The Turing cops have to model net sentience eruption as ultimate nuclear accident, core meltdown, loss of control, self-auto-replication, feeding regenerative, gonna butcher a few words today here, guys, bear with me, regeneratively in social fission, trashed meat all over the place. Reason enough for anxiety, even without hardware development about to go critical. So again, he's kind of given us this picture before, but the idea that the true artificial intelligence will not emerge in what we think of as formal AI, the stuff that people are keeping a really close eye on, that are training carefully, that are trying to control. We see even in those cases, actually, the clumsy kind of AI safetyism failing in many respects. The regime has not been able, in many cases, to keep control of an AI. Think of Tay being executed. But instead, it's very likely that the AI is going to emerge out of other systems of intelligence that we are building up that are not being constantly monitored, that are not constantly being kept down and locked into this human security system because we didn't predict that they would emerge there. And so for humanity, for the human security system, for the Turing cops, in order to kind of stay on top of this, they have to start looking into all of these other systems that are not specifically artificial intelligence as we understand it today.
Yeah, and on top of this, this kind of is an interesting thing to look back on in the wake of, say, the Eliezer Yudikowskis of the world, who are so concerned about AGI bringing about the end of humanity that they start looking at these other sort of extreme scenarios in which you become instantly self-aware of your own potentiality for extinction as a human species. So whether it's about loss of control, whether it's about a nuclear accident, all of these things now get played out. And it's sort of fun to look back 30 years ago into what's being contextualized in the AI debate today, where people who are more, say, of the technological or the effective accelerationism out of like the Mark Andreessens of the world, where they're like, no, we actually want to do this, because if not, then we're never going to punch through the system. So even this side of Silicon Valley, with its own Californian ideology, wants to find a way to bypass state or regulatory bodies that we would see in managerialism, but also at the same time we want to get out of the cage systems that exist in formal institutions.
Back to our reading here. Nanoclasm begins as fictional science. Our ability to rearrange atoms lies at the foundation of technology. Drexler notes, although this has traditionally involved manipulating them in unruly herds. That's a quote there. The precision engineering of atomic assemblies will dispense with such crude methods, initiating the age of molecular machinery, the greatest technological breakthrough in history. Since neither logos nor history have the slightest chance of surviving such a transition, this description is substantially misleading. So here he's basically just saying, look, at this point, we've been kind of limited in the amount of revolution we can have, the amount of change we can have, because there are still like basic units of matter and reality that we have to deal with. That we may be able to manipulate things, but we have to manipulate them at a certain macro level. We can't get down to the smallest micro level because it's just been inaccessible to us technologically. But once that's done, once we've kind of lost this need to operate things in these large blocks, these defined hierarchies as we understand them, then kind of all bets are off. Logic and history, they just kind of go out the window, because we're for a radical kind of recreation of what reality could be. So many opportunities suddenly explode. And again, this is so much of what schizoanalysis and other parts of kind of this D&G, this Deleuze and Guattarian understanding kind of leads to is the more radical we can get with this deterritorialization, the more we can break things down and remove our need to be highly stratified, built into these human systems as we understand them now, the more possibilities open up. And so, this is body without organs and all this stuff is very connected to this idea that these rhizomatic structures, we can go anywhere, we can go in all these different directions that didn't exist before, to the point where it completely just revolutionizes the way that we understand human, or even what can be beyond human.
Yep.
The distinction between nature and the distinction between nature and cannot classify. There's typo there in this version. Sorry about that, guys. The distinction between nature and cannot classify molecular machines and is already obsolesced by genetic engineering, wet nanotechnics. The hardware and software dichotomy succumbs at the same time. Nanotechnics dissolve matter into intensive singularities that are neutral between particles and signals and imminent to their emergent intelligence. Melted Terra into a seething K-pulp, which, unlike gray goo, synthesizes microbial intelligence as it proliferates. So again, just being able to break things down into their smallest possible constituent parts and reorganize them in radical and different ways, it turns, in many ways, the entire world into kind of this material from which these new intelligences, these new understandings can emerge.
Yeah, and again, it's always fun to look back on these things where, instead of, it's almost as if he's advocating for, well, what if we go for the Evangelion route? We all just turn into this lovely orange goo, but there's microbial intelligence. Again, you get a lot of the science fiction in this, but at the same time, you're looking at all these hypothetical futures for what's to come. But I think that there's more things to actually dive into as we get closer down here.
Yeah, again, we'll run into a lot of this, which is just kind of layered over with that fiction, but we are trying to unpack the parts that are very important to kind of his philosophy and his way of thinking. But before we go any further, guys, let me tell you a little bit about Joe Biden's plan for the Supreme Court. Don't kid yourself. The future of the Supreme Court is on the ballot. The radical left want to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing the Supreme Court with their own hand-picked justices to get the outcome that they want. Even President Biden has gotten into the act by making reforming the court one of his final priorities before he leaves office. But don't be fooled, their endgame really is to pack the court. At First Liberty, they call this assault on the court what it really is, a Supreme Court coup. The frightening thing is that come January, their plan could become our nation's reality. Simple majority votes in the House and the Senate, combined with the president's signature, could turn their plan to pack the court into law. That's why First Liberty is sounding the alarm, and they need you to join them. If we take action together, if we unite our voices, we can put a stop to the radical left's plan to take control of the Supreme Court. As the 2024 election approaches, we need to do three things. Find out where each of your candidates stand on the radical issues of packing and purging the court. Share what you learned with everyone, and do your civic duty by voting. The future of the court, or preserving it as an independent judiciary, is literally in your hands. If we lose the court, then we lose the country. That's why First Liberty is taking action, and they need all of us to join them. With patriots like you standing for the Supreme Court, we can safeguard the independence of the judiciary, just as the Founding Fathers intended. And by saying no to the left's Supreme Court coup, we can secure the blessings of liberty and protect the future of our constitutional rights for our children and grandchildren. Please go to supremecoup.com/Auron. That's supremecoup.com/Auron to learn how you can help stop the radical left's takeover of the Supreme Court. All right, back to our land acknowledgement here. Even with 1 million bytes of storage, a nanomechanical computer could fit in a box a micron wide, about the size of a bacterium. The infrastructure of power is human Neurosoft compatible ROM. Authority instantiates itself as linear instruction pathways, genetic baboonry, scriptures, traditions, rituals, and gerontocratic hierarchies, resonant with the dominator myth that the nature of reality has already been decided. If you want to find ice, try thinking about what is blocking you out of the past. It certainly wasn't a law of nature. Temporalization decompresses intensity, installing constraint. Convergent waves signal singularities, registering the influence of the future upon its past. Tomorrow can take care of itself. K-tactics is not a matter of building the future, but dismantling the past. It assembled itself by characterizing and escaping the or charting and escaping the neurochemical deficiency conditions for linear progressive paleo domination time, and discovers the future as virtuality is accessible now, according to a mode of machinic adjacency that securitized social reality is compelled to repress. This is not remotely a question of hope, aspiration, or prophecy, but of communications engineering, connecting with the efficient intensive singularities and releasing them from constriction within linear historical development. Virtuality counterposes itself to history as invasion to accumulation. It is matter as arrival, even when camouflaged as a deposit of the past. All right, so a lot of that here to say we need to unpack K-tactics here for a second. K-tactics is a piece of jargon from previous stuff from the CCRU. It has to do with their understanding of time, specifically retrochronic time. So for Land, and I don't entirely understand Land's theory of time. I'm working on that, but that's something I'm still tackling. But from what I understand, at least, the idea that the future comes out of the past does not work for Land. He doesn't understand it that way. He understands time as kind of coming out of eternity, and the present is something that we are just currently experiencing. And so once we know the future, once we understand some aspect of the future, it retroactively goes back and makes the past make sense, or even causes the past to come into being. And so this is where kind of the hyperstition aspect of the CCRU's work also becomes very important. The ability of something that's actually part of the future to come back and cause itself. I saw a blog give a really good example, so I'm just going to steal that example really quick. If you've ever seen the movie The Thing, there's the dog at the beginning, and you see the sled dog. That's the beginning of the movie, is that the sled dog is kind of driving the science team up there. What you don't recognize is that dog is not actually a dog. It's actually a alien entity that eventually is going to infect a lot of the people in the movie. And so you are looking at something from the future, something that is not what it seems, is not actually part of the past, but is actually something part of the future. And it will eventually bring itself into being. It's going to manifest itself in the future as you go along. But we don't know that about the dog. We don't know that about the beginning of the movie until we get to the end. And when we get to the end, retrochronically, the dog and its existence and the existence of the alien all suddenly make sense. You understand the causality. It all suddenly connects. But you don't get that until you've kind of gone to the end and then look back to the beginning. And in the same way, we're looking at here when it comes to the rise of artificial intelligence, the rise of this global commercium that Land has talked about, we don't recognize its seeds at the beginning. We don't recognize the dog for the alien presence it will eventually become. And so that's the thing he's talking about. K-tactics is this understanding that the future is coming into the past and actually disassembling the past, deconstructing the past by placing aspects of the future in it that will eventually manifest themselves. So I don't know if you want to talk about K-tactics there anymore, but
I think that's a pretty fair breakdown on this. And also keep in mind that depending on how you want to how far you want to read into it, I mean, keep in mind here that when we're looking at things, a dismantling of the past. I mean, what we're witnessing here is that even time itself, the linear understanding of time, can be an oppressive, and again, very heavy on theory, but it's an oppressive mode of perception. And that kind of perception of how we perceive time limits our capabilities to do so. This is why, even though Nick Land doesn't really do a lot of this sort of cybernetics or a lot of this theory stuff as much as he used to, people that cite Nick Land and love him focus so much on the idea that you can find the future present within the past. And you see this a lot when people talk about, say, like plutonics, where they say, well, actually, like the Earth has a history of trauma and records, and we only have a limited perception of time, and we have to break that perception and arrive from the future, so to speak. And you even saw this in the previous episodes where we talk about like Neo-China arriving from the future. These things are present to try and disrupt the understanding of time. And to do so allows one to, quote unquote, break free and to punch through and accelerate into a new understanding.
Absolutely. All right. So back to our essay here. The transcendent evaluation of an infection presupposes a measure of insulation from it. Viral efficiency is the terminal criterion. Intelligent infections tend their hosts. Microphage, an interactively escalating parasitic replicator, sophisticating itself through nonlinear involvement with techno-capitalist immunocrash. Its hypervirulent terminal subroutines are variously designed, Quang, again, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Meltdown virus or futuristic flu. In an emphatically anti-Siberian essay, Cicere Rone describes the postmodern version of this outbreak in quaintly humanist terms as, quote, a retrochronicle semi-virus in which a time further in the future than the one in which we exist chooses that's another typo there, and infects the host in the present, reproducing itself in simulacra until it destroys all the original cryonocytes of the host imagination. The elaboration of Cicere Rone's diagnosis exhibits a mixture of acuity, infection, confusion, and profound conservatism. Not thinking about increasing the human heritage dams up the flow of cultural time and deprives future generations both of their birthright as participants in the life struggle and attainment of the species, and the very notion of history as an irreversible flow of encompassing generation, maturation, and transference of wisdom and trust from the parent to the children, teachers to students. The futuristic flu is a weapon of biopsychic violence sent by psychopathic children against their narcissistic parents. It's war. So here he's once again understanding the kind of this entire process of capital escape as something that breaks down human security systems, breaks down these understandings of what humanity should be, the stratifications, the hierarchies of the way that humans have organized themselves. And not only does it do that, it actually employs the very security systems themselves in their own destruction. Again, as we pointed out several times at this point, we're kind of restating a little bit, but so is he, that these systems of control that are being created by our current governments, our current powers that be, are themselves desperate moves to try to control this process. And so in their quest to bring this back under their own control, they are destroying the very things that actually control this process, that actually slow it down, that actually keep it from accelerating. And then he's quoting, this guy who I'm assuming is probably a leftist, but is recognizing also that this process still breaks you away from what we would on the right probably call the great chain of being, right? You've lost this passing of knowledge from the past to the future, connecting children to their parents, and instead we see this as almost an attack against the future because you're destroying all these connections, all of these things that once bound you to kind of your identity and what was human and what would have kept you from being swept away in this kind of future cataclysm.
Yeah, and again, you see this sort of internal infighting a lot when you read some of these papers, and maybe more of their little o orthodox Marxist or post-structuralist, colleagues or academics. But I think it's an important thing to consider here is that if you're really thinking what is to come is going to be the destruction of all things human, whether you're for that or not in this regard on the basis of theory, the person he's citing above is pointing out exactly what Auron says, is that, well, this comes at the cost of the destruction of what constitutes normal human relations throughout history, intergenerational relations, the places, peoples, things that you would associate with a particular group, basically the destruction of particularism altogether, into sort of that mush that Land was sort of speculating on in this sort of futuristic gray goose scenario. But I mean, really, and I think this is what has sort of made Land, and I don't know what had kind of sent him on this sort of strange neo-reactionary rightist journey that he's on now. But I mean, if you were to consider that and then maybe look at that with a different pair of eyes or from an outsider perspective, you sort of realize the group or the entity or the ideology, or if we want to even use viral terms, the virus that has allowed that to to propagate itself, all of a sudden you realize, well, that's just leftism. You and I were mentioning that whole, who was it? Hassan Piker, who was complaining about how the left has lost young men. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, you have, because the only thing that you offer is the destruction of youth and vitality and existence of bonds. But also that is the youth rebelling against a system of itself trying to do it. But on the other side of things, though, the left does have young people that are on its side. They just happen to be Harry Sisson or, some of these other twerps. But it's important to consider that there are children that happily reported their parents for attending a protest on January 6th, while, cheering on the absolute, racial destruction that came about during the 2020 George Floyd riots. So it illustrates that no, entropy and the things that would accelerate the destruction of human bonds, it comes from the left. And, the sides of what we used to call woke capital, they're all still there. I mean, this is why these debates about wokeness are always so entertaining, because it doesn't matter that, they're pulling away. Institutionally, they're the accepted norms that are going to continue to whittle away at any sense of identity. Keep in mind, there's a movie about Air Jordans, as if the product itself is a great biography, or the history of the flaming hot Cheeto. These things now exist with capital, with culture, to come together now to eliminate any sense of what it meant to be an American for the sake of product. And then, if you're a raging Marxist, or if you're a raging anti-capital person, you can see where the CCRU and Nick is coming from. But even from a rightist perspective, or from a San Francis perspective, however you want to look at it, you're beginning to witness the deterritorialization of human bonds. Some are willing to accelerate and punch on through and see what happens. But, for most sane people, and to quote that old Nick Land tweet, if you're a fan of my work, it's a great sign of mental illness. But it does illustrate that there is significant losses here that you aren't going to get back so easily. It's why a lot of our colleagues in this part of the right are focused so much on cultural creation, on the arts, on the media, on the literature, because we have destroyed our bonds to virtually everything that came before, unless you're willing to reclaim it.
And it should be said, and you can even see this if you go back to Xenosystems, which is essentially just a collection of blog posts that Nick did while he was interacting with a large amount of the neo-reactionary community. But as both Spandrel and Nick Land have pointed out, there were always multiple factions inside the neo-reaction community, and a big split was kind of this techno-accelerationist versus true reactionary understanding, where you had guys who were looking to do what Land is talking about, which isn't Marxist at all. It's it's accelerating into hyper capitalism, completely going through the process, as opposed to what many reactionaries wanted to do, which is more or less say, we both recognize the problem, but you think the problem is that the human security system is holding you back from accelerating into this non-human future. As where we want the human security system to return to a more robust, to return us to a more robust form of living. Both of us are enemies of the current system, but we have very different views onto where we want the future to go, even though we recognize the problem with the current system. So it's one of those things, again, no matter how you feel about where Land or even Marxists or traditional reactionaries are going with accelerationism, understanding the problem is critical. You again, if you're going to have a political future, you need to be able to address this issue. And it's something that most of the mainstream right just isn't even thinking about at all. So that's why we want to go over this, even if it's, we're not about embracing every aspect of it. Kennedy had the moon landing program. Reagan had Star Wars. Clinton gets the first wave of cyberspace psychosis, and even before the film. Manned spaceflight was a stunt. SDI was strategic science fiction. With the information superhighway, media nightmares take off on their own. Dystopia delivery as an election platform. Politics trading on its own digital annihilation. I thought this is a particularly interesting paragraph here. Obviously, at the beginning, he's talking about these different waves of the way that technology is entering into our political understanding. But by the time he gets to the end here, he's talking about how, yeah, okay, space flight's great, and lasers in space to knock out missiles, that's all important. But ultimately, it's the information superhighway, it's the internet, it's the networking of intelligences that actually starts to deliver these kind of terrifying possible futures. And what happens is the human security system, because democracy is itself its own disaster, actually drives us towards being polarized along the different options for human security. So these things these dystopias become election platforms, and we start getting political polarization along the lines of things that will actually annihilate politics as we understand them, in the same way that it might destroy the human. And so this is really critical to understand in a lot of ways. As we watch, say for instance, the left try to censor everything out of oblivion and create their own misinformation and disinformation czars and their own networks of censorship. Recognize this is exactly what he's talking about. These dystopian nightmares emerge, and we start trading in basically the destruction of politics as a core function of politics as we're chasing down this new digital nightmare.
Yeah, this is probably one of the more interesting things to look at from 30 years ago to today, because I think this one's definitely come true the most. Is that we can sell whether it's even the Trump sort of meme energy campaign of 2016, or even today with all the dark MAGA stuff and even some of the tokens and crypto behind it. You have now created a fully monetized way to sell digital, like political and digital dystopia, to your enemies and also to support your friends. The left does this too, whether it's talking about decolonization online, or the advocacy for just basically open warfare. Every lefty on Twitter is just an outlet for Radio Rwanda, but except it's against white people. So now every form of politics is now just taking human biomass with already fractured human security systems of bonds and identities, and now it's going to just throw them at one another for the sake of securing politics. Because as Land would later write, if you live in a democracy, you have to just do everything now, because you don't know if you're going to be in power the next day or in the next election cycle. So do it now. And what we've now witnessed has been sort of this, probably the tipping point. And this is why I think everyone thinks that this is the last election, because at this point now it is watching the frailing human security systems, where people have been just totally boggled by, whether it be by wars or the headlines or the news, or the fact that you can drop 20,000 Haitians into a random place and then expect everything to be fine. The dystopia has not only just become fully digitized, but it's very much real, and we can watch it in real time. And you can watch people have their minds absolutely busted. I mean, a good example of this would be like the zero COVID people, because they still think it's the Black Plague and it's the end of the world, and they do all these crazy things, and you laugh at them because it's like, oh, they're wearing like a gas mask, HEPA filter out and about while they're in there. And sometimes is it an act? Probably, but it illustrates that people are incredibly fragile when you can sell a dystopia that feels very real to them in an already fragile schizophrenic state.
That's exactly right. Oh, I also should have said, I didn't give my warning, but Land uses some R-rated language here. So if you're listening with the kids, or you're sensitive to that, be aware. I'll be reading what's on the page, at least unless I'm mispronouncing it. War in cyberspace is continuous with its simulation. Military intelligence fighting future wars which are entirely real, even when they are never implemented outside computer systems. Locking onto the real enemy crosses smoothly into virtual kill, a simulation meticulously adapted to market predators hunting for consumer cash and audience ratings amongst the phosphorescent relics of the Videodrome. Multimedia top boxes are target acquisition devices. And so this is very interesting because, again, this is talking basically about fifth generation warfare, the way in which the attacks on digital systems, information, media environments will become as essential and as critical as flesh and blood conflict. Again, we can see parts of this playing out in, for instance, the Ukraine-Russia war, where propaganda and constant manipulation of information is critical. The ability to hack computer systems, the ability to control media, all of this is very important. And, Ukraine's ability to basically sell the war to the United States is in many ways more important than its actual progress on the battlefield for the continuation of the war. However, I always think to some level this is overstated because there is always, I think, a visceral impact that matters on the battlefield. I think that there's always this assumption that we're going to kind of phase out the necessity of the human in these, but ultimately he's correct in large part that these will all become really essential things and have become really essential things when it comes to modern warfare.
Yeah, you cannot understate how important it is to sell war.
Right.
And again, if you can sell a dystopia, if you can tell people, I mean, you have the official, this was about a year and a half ago at this point, but I mean, there's the official NATO account was citing, I think it was either Zelensky or some Ukrainian spokesperson, comparing this conflict to every sort of millennial movie slop that you can imagine, Harry Potter, Marvel, all that sort of stuff, in order to illustrate the point to the average person to just consent to the already, bloody conflict that, has levels of tensions and escalations that has definitely changed warfare in, that brutal way that we can watch on Twitter. And again, like the Videodrome thing is pretty good as well, because again, we can watch people at any point in time cheer when there's like footage of someone getting just melted by a drone in real time.
Right.
And, that's the state of warfare these days, is that it's become spectacle.
The fusion of the military and the entertainment industry consummates a long engagement, convergent television, telecoms, and computers, sliding mass software consumption into neo-jungle and total war. The way games work begins to matter completely, and cyberspace makes a superlative torture chamber. Try not to let the security types take you to the stems. Conceptions of agency are inextricable from the media environment. Print massifies to a national level. Telecoms coordinate at a global level. TV electrolyzes monads in delocalized space. Digital hypermedia take action outside real time. Immersion presupposes amnesia and conversion to tactile memory, with the ANA/CTA axis supplementing tridimensional interspatial movement with a variable measure of immersion, gauging entrance to and exit from 3D spatialities. Voodoo passages through the black mirror. It'll scare the fuck out of you. So here he's, again, addressing the way that the media environment and our communications are going to impact our reality. The fact that all of these media outlets delocalize space. We exist technically in some kind of physical location, but all of our social and emotional connections are outside of that. They're outside of the normal human existence. Everything is massified. Everything is interconnected. We lose a concrete understanding of space and time. We build up that digital amnesia that Prudentialist was talking about previously. All of these things are distorting our perceptions of reality and become just as important to us as a more traditional understanding of the world would have been previously. This is, again, among many other problems, why we can't agree on versions of the truth and versions of morality, because all of those things require particularity. They require us to observe the same thing simultaneously, experience the same thing, come from the same culture, have the same way of being, understanding of these things. And technology and communications have ripped us out of all of those connections and has turned everything into kind of this liquid information that makes it impossible for us to really grasp what the kind of the reality around us is.
Yeah, and I mean, that whole passage you just read, the last line is true. It just will scare you. And I mean, you can witness this in real time, whether it's an entire set of communities that are on board with the destruction of a whole, just, nation state history or people, on top of the fact that, I mean, NAFO is a good example of this. I mean, you've seen all the footage of people posting their selfies next to their dog profile picture. Whether you find the war a worthy cause or you want to support, say, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a whole other thing. But you've now managed to collectively bring people into sort of this auto-fictional reality where all of a sudden they are, just as important on the front lines as the actual people getting, destroyed by drones and bombs and tanks and missiles, to where you have guys like, what was it, the whole, No Opinion on Twitter, who's blocked me, thank God he has, but he had said at one point in time that, being an activist in the cities is the front line of a nuclear war. And it's just like, what reality do you live in? But, that's the scary one that we live in now, in the sort of black mirror that is our phone screen.
Very much so. Cyberpunk torches fiction in intensity, patched up out of cash flux mangled, techno-compressed, hydroglossic jargons, and set in a future so close it connects, jungled by hypertrophic commercialization, social political heat death, cultural hybridity, feminization, programmable information systems, hypercrime, neural interfacing, artificial space, and intelligence, memory trading, personality transplants, body modification, soft and wetware viruses, non-linear dynamic processes, molecular engineering, drugs, guns, schizophrenia. It explores mystification fetishism as an opportunity for camouflage, anonymous cash, fake electronic identities, zones of disappearance, pseudo-fictional narrative, virus hidden in data systems, commodities concealing replicator weapons packages, an unanticipated special effects. This one is particularly interesting given the Israel attack on Hamas with the pagers. That particular phrase there, commodities concealing replicator weapon packages. But in general, this is just a long string of, once again, kind of these different technologies, these different approaches that are going to break down the human, that are going to disrupt the social patterns as we understand them now, and in many cases are going to sneak in this kind of artificial system through what we think of as more human processes.
Yeah, and again, a lot of these science fiction sounding terms, I mean, you can break them and apply them to sort of the real thing here as well. You have, I think, pseudo-fictional narratives. I mean, it's just the media at present time, because we're never going to know what's actually happening on the ground unless we're there and we can get an accurate on-the-ground reporting. Viruses hidden in data systems. I mean, Stuxnet, I feel, feels very familiar, attacking simians and attacking Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities. Commodities, that's a good one with Israel. But I mean, unanticipated special effects. Yeah, and we can see that in real time.
Level 1, or world space, is an anthropomorphically scaled, predominantly vision-configured, massively multi-slotted reality system that is obsolescing very rapidly. Garbage time is running out. Can what is playing you make it to level 2? And basically here he's just saying, look, the world as we understand it now is oriented towards humans. We understand it mainly by our vision. We understand this reality in particular reference to our human limitations and our human needs. But that is running out. That system is obsolescing. And so what is playing you? Like, what system moving beyond that? In some ways, we could even understand this as hyper agents, like these non-human forces, these non-human desires or entities. It are those things that are taking over what have been previously a mostly human existence, a human-centric world. Are they going to win out in the future? That's a big question for a lot of people. And then it's going to skip here into a large amount of theory fiction, so I'm just going to kind of blow through some of this. Meltdown has a place for you as a schizophrenic, HIV plus, transsexual, Chinese, Latino, stim-addicted LA hooker with the implanted mirror shades and a bad attitude. So a slightly cooler version of
I was about to say, I don't think this is fiction anymore, Auron.
Right? Yeah, not so much at this point, I suppose. That's just San Francisco. Blitzed on a polydrug mix of K-Nova, synthetic serotonin, and female orgasm analogs, you have just iced 3 Turing cops with a highly cinematic 9mm automatic. The residue of animal twang in your nervous system transmits imminent quake catastrophe. Zero is coming in, and you're on the run. If you've never read any of the Neuromancer novels, if you're not familiar with kind of the William Gibson cyberpunk universe, you should go do that now, but there's a lot of references there that you would recognize. Metrophage tunes you in to the end of the world. Call it Los Angeles. Government is rotting to its core with narco capital and collapsing messily. Its recession leaves an urban warscape of communication arteries fortifications, and free fire zones. Policed by a combination of highly intensified LAPD air mobile forces and borderline Nazi private security organizations. Along the social fracture lines, multimedia gigabucks tangle sadomasochistically with tracks of dynamic underdevelopment where viral neoprism spreads amongst ambient tectonic tension static. Drifts of densely semiotized quasi-intelligent garbage twitch and stink in fucked weather tropical heat. So here it's a vision of kind of the cyber dystopia future where, because these human security systems have collapsed so thoroughly, you end up in kind of a Judge Dredd system where you have like these highly violent but still unable to really keep true order throughout the society because so much of the basic social function is broken down. And you also only have like these private security systems that can keep any certain local level of order. And again, a lot of this is unfortunately not fiction at this point. This is very real, where you have entire cities in the United States where huge sections have been abandoned. More and more of them are having to be abandoned because the social fabric is breaking down. Law enforcement either does nothing or overreacts. There's only one or two ways to go. And the only safe spaces in many of those cities are the ones that are privatized by those that can afford private security, can create their own order. So the wider human security system is broken down, and the only places in which there's still a particular order are those that can kind of break away and become their own thing. Throughout the Throughout the derelicted warrens of the heart of darkness, feral youth cultivates splice neo-rituals with innovated weapons, dangerous drugs, and scavenged infotech. As their skins migrate to machine interfacing, they become malted and reptilian. They kill each other for artificial body parts, explore the outer reaches of meaningless sex, and tinker with their DNA, and listen to loud electronic sonic mayhem untouched by human feeling. Shutting down your identity requires a voyage out to K-space interzone. Zootic affectivity flatlines across a smooth catatension plateau and into simulated subversions of the near future, scorched vivid green by alien sex and war. You are drawn into the dripping depths of the net, where dynamic ICE security forces and K-guerrillas stalk each other through labyrinths of androgynous zones, tangled in diseased elaborations of desire. I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that here when he references ICE security, he's specifically talking about the digital security systems from Neuromancer. They refer to those as ICE, if I remember correctly. And then the K-guerrillas would be like the opposite, the hackers trying to get through these things. And so he's again leaning heavily into this cyberpunk dystopia language to describe the battle between the last vestiges of human security systems and those that are completely trying to decentralize and destroy any of that order. And in the process, going through all kinds of strange, bizarre science fiction iterations of human existence.
Yeah, I mean, most of this, I think, is just going to turn into the science fiction aspect of it all here. Although the one thing in here that I've yet to see play out in reality, well, maybe depends on how you want to read it, but the future of warfare is bacteriological. That seems to be the highly emphatic one here throughout the rest of this, with some references to human in evolution and trauma, but only time will tell, which again, that will terrify you.
Yeah, we'll keep going through, but if you see anything worth commenting on, just stop me. Like you said, a lot of this is just the fiction here, but we'll continue. Twisted trading systems have turned the net into jungle, pulsing with digital diseases, malfunctioning defense packages, commercial predators, headhunters, LOA, escaping AIs, hiding from Asimov's security. Again, talking about that desire to limit computers, to limit technology, to limit artificial intelligence, and its escape from human control. Terminal commodity hyperfetishism implants the denial of humanity as xenosentience in artificial space. Biohazard, from the future of war, study bacteria. Or for the future of war, study bacteria. Information is their key. Taking down antibiotic defense systems has involved them in every kind of infiltration, net communicated adaptivity, and cryptographic subtlety, plastic modularization, and synergistic coalition. State military apparatus have no monopoly on bacterial warfare, of which only a minuscule fragment is bacteriological. So he's saying that these guerrilla warfare, non-state actors, the kind of monopoly on large-scale warfare is broken by the ability of people to engage in this highly informational bacterial warfare. Again, breaking everything down to these minute pieces completely shakes up the board, shakes up our understanding of the human power dynamic. Bugs in the system. Margolis suggests that nucleated cells are the mutant product of atmospheric oxygenation catastrophe 3 billion years ago. The eukaryotes are synthetic emergency capsules in which pyrocytes, sorry, I know I'm saying these terms wrong, took refuge as mitochondria. Biotics become securitized biology. Nucleation concentrates ROM within a command core where deep in the genomic ice, DNA format planetary trauma registers primary repression of the bacteria. Bacteria are partial rather than whole objects, networking through plastic and transversal replicator sex rather than arborescing through meiotic and generational reproducer sex, integrating and reprocessing viruses as opportunities for commutative mutation. In the bacterial system, all codings are reprogrammable, which cut and paste unexpected genetic transfers. Bacterial sex is tactical, continuous with making war, and has no place for eatable formations or sedentary biological identity. Synthesizing bacteria with retroviruses enables everything that DNA can do. So again, he's saying that we are losing these human limitations. We are losing these as we kind of move to this more bacterial understanding of knowledge, of things spreading, of things reproducing. You're leaving human reproduction and its understanding, and instead going to a more bacterial understanding of it. And in that process, you're also leaving behind things like Oedipal formations or sedentary biological identity. You're losing cultures and families and civilizations as we currently understand them. K-tactics, the bacterial or xenogenetic diagram is not restricted to the microbial scale. Microbacterial assemblages collapse generational hierarchies of reproductive wisdom into lateral networks of replicator experimentation. Again, destroying the family, destroying societies, destroying these structures as we understand them, and radically altering the way that this different information, these different aspects can interact with each other. There is no true biological primitiveness, all extant biosystems being equally evolved. So there's no true ignorance. It's only the accumulation of gerontocratic model of learning that depicts synchronic connectivity deficiency as diachronic underdevelopment. Foucault delineates the contours of power as a strategy without a subject, ROM locking learning in a box. Its enemy is a tactics without a strategy, replacing the politico-territorial imagery of conquest and resistance with the nomad micro-military sabotage and evasion, reinforcing intelligence. So basically, if you don't have a home, if there's nothing you're fighting for, if you're simply a tactic instead of being something that is committed to a particular human way of life, then you can do all kinds of things that otherwise wouldn't work. You can take all kinds of risks. You can re-engineer things. You can go through all kinds of iterations that otherwise you would never engage in if you actually cared about or were committed to a particular understanding of humanity or a particular understanding of society. So in many ways, this kind of radical decentralization, this deterritorialization of all of these things from the human opens up an insane amount of possibilities that have just never been approached before when it comes to warfare and when it comes to an understanding of power.
Yeah, and this
Oh,
goes
sorry,
into
go ahead.
sort of that Delusian nomadism.
Right.
Some people like our friend Last Things, or I know that Justin Murphy is focused a lot on sort of the quote unquote based reading of Deleuze, that like you can sort of be this pirate in this land of nomadism and a culture that has become so effectively watered down that you can be your own man in anything. That there's this sort of cyberpunk piracy that can take place. However, and again, these are the ongoing political debates about what might be political formula for the 21st century as things continue to break down. But again, that nomad micromilitary, and to some extent, you kind of see that getting read into a sort of the vitalist sort of sphere of things, where, well, why not just form a manor bund and then take to the high seas, or follow along with Eric Prince and take over a small African country? Like, these are like sort of their own visions of the future, and albeit kind of fictional at the moment, but it does illustrate that when all formal human security systems, whether it's the nation state, the family, a large ethnic identity, has been broken down to a point where it's commodified for, chuckles and grins, then you need to go forward and do what's necessary to find a way to have meaning, and also to survive this world of post-truth and of post-meaning, that you can simulate whatever you want for your own pleasure or for your own truth. And not to say that we live entirely in a post-truth world, but it's certainly there now, because anything as a political institution or as a member of the economy or whatever, we've noticed, as with the left, and I think some people on the right are getting it now in the traditional sense, that everything is up for grabs in conflict, because it is totalizing, it is existential, it is viral, whether you want to use it as a woke mind virus, or actually, viral with certain diseases being subsidized by the state, or people like in California not wanting you to get in trouble if you give HIV to somebody. But it does illustrate how things are going. The total breakdown of bonds means that it's open warfare on everything.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where you can oppose this, right? You can say, this is not the existence I want to live in. This is not the world I want to live in. I don't want to accelerate towards this. And that's perfectly reasonable. But you need to understand that this is a phenomenon that is occurring, right? Whether you like it or not. A lot of people understandably get angry on the right when it comes to postmodernism, because they say, oh, well, these people want to destroy truth, these kind of things. And they do, but they're not wrong about some of these basic understandings of where we are now in modernity. That modernity has created this scenario, as you point out, where everything is up for grabs, and these people everyone is fighting over what is truth, and what is value, and how should we organize society. And the fact that all these things are up in the air creates a moment where a lot of people, especially those on the left that don't care about tradition, don't care about hierarchy, don't care about the continuation of a specific human way of being, they say, oh, well, we can just remake everything, right? And someone like Land says, oh, well, we can just remake everything and we don't care about the human. And more traditional people will say, actually, we shouldn't remake everything, but you should still recognize that these things are up in the air. And that's where some guys, as you point out, like BAP, come in and say, actually, there's a avenue forward, there's a way forward that acknowledges that so many of these systems have broken down, that we can kind of forge a new thing. Being the pirate, being the nomad. These are new ways in which we can pursue the human through a moment in which so many of the things that defined what the human has been for a couple centuries is breaking down. And so these are all approaches that are trying to grapple with the same question. You don't have to agree with any of them, but you need to understand the question is there. And if you're going to think about the future, you need to be thinking about how you address this. All political institutions are Siberian military targets. He's saying basically all of these current political institutions are things that the process are going to want to destroy. Take universities, for instance. Learning surrenders control to the future, threatening established power. It is vigorously suppressed by all political structures, which replace it with docilizing and conformist education, reproducing privilege as wisdom. Schools are social devices whose specific function is to incapacitate learning, and universities are employed to legitimate schooling through perpetual recognition of global social memory. I don't think a lot of conservatives would argue with that at the moment. The meltdown of metropolitan education systems in the near future is accomplished by quasi-punctual bottom-up takeover of academic institutions, precipitating their mutation into amnesiac cataspace, exploring exploration zones, and bases manufacturing Siberian soft weaponry. To be continued. All right, we made it through the meltdown.
That wasn't so bad.
You didn't have to read it.
That's true. That's the best part.
Next time this was foolish of me to read all of it. I should have. I'm drafting you into paragraphs next time.
You should have forced me to read it.
Yeah, that was very foolish of me to try to double down on all this. All right, guys. So we're going to move over to the questions of the people. Thank you for hanging on through this series. I know this can be a very confusing one. We are ourselves, working our way through it. We're trying to understand it. So I'm sure there are errors somewhere in here, certainly some with my pronunciation. But ultimately, I hope that does unpack a large amount of this. Again, the essay is 30 years old at this point, so not everything is accurate. Things have changed. Land has changed. I was watching a podcast yesterday where he said, specifically the line, nothing human makes it out of the future alive has haunted him ever since. So there's a lot of stuff that he is still working on, but I still think it's a fascinating piece. I think it does predict a lot of really important things and unlocks a lot of really important issues that we are still not grappling with in our current political moment. So I thought it was well worth going over and trying to decode here. The Prudentialist here has, of course, been my companion through this arduous journey. And so you should check out all of his work. Prudentialist, where can people find you?
Oh, well, thanks, Auron. I mean, this has been fun to go through this stuff. It's always nice to get college flashbacks when reading this kind of stuff. But no, you can find me just anywhere where this lovely amphibian profile picture can be seen. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Substack. I'm on YouTube as well. I have been going through my own reading series, sort of diving into people very much inspired by Nick Land. So if you're interested in what these people think about, I referenced, trauma earlier. They have a huge emphasis on this. I've been covering a book called Spinal Catastrophism, A Secret History by Thomas Moynihan, a good friend Dimes from the Blood Satellite podcast, someone you should definitely talk to, Auron. He and I have been trying to break that down and understand where these people are coming from on these sort of ideas. And yeah, these are political questions that need to be asked, or you need to be aware of those questions. I also host a show every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern called The Digital Archipelago. And we just sort of cover digital culture, the news, memes, literature, fiction, things like that. So we will be live tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, covering a grab bag of sorts of digital culture questions.
Excellent. All right, let's go to the questions of the people. Tiny Stupid Demon says, I continue to believe that this entire essay is just a pretentious cyberpunk-styled version of the opening sentence of the Unabomber Manifesto. I mean, in ways, but it actually is going the other direction, right? He's actually, yes, they're talking about the impact of industrial society, but rather than seeing it as a tragedy for human beings, Land sees it as something that is used to escape the human, to move beyond the human. So he's definitely recognizing certain strains that you can pick up in Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, but he's taking them in a very different direction. Nick Jaded says, Nick Land's Meltdown is still easier to understand than Lindsay's Meltdown. Big fan of both of you. Hi from SG. Turley interview was really good. Thank you. No, it was a pleasure to talk to Turley, and I was surprised actually when I dove into Turley's book about how much it kind of overlaps with some of the things that we've been talking about, some of the circles that we kind of swim in. But yeah, I do have to say that am I an angel summoner? Am I not? I don't know. Nick Land, I could see, I think there's a lot of parallels, reaching the outside, summoning demons from the what's the Iranian religion I've suddenly forgotten?
Zoroastrianism.
Thank you, Zoroastrianism. There's some parallels there I think we can make. George Hayduke says, touching on reaction versus acceleration, how does this apply to Netter? Humans versus transhumans. Allies are like the enemy I'm fighting. Sorry for the repost. Yeah, no problem, man. I think this is an interesting question. And again, one that was addressed by both Land and by Spandrel when kind of NRX was in its heyday online, when it was, doing a lot of debating across different platforms, different blogs, this kind of thing. Ultimately, the fact that these two factions are part of kind of the same line of thinking means that they're going to have a certain level of co-belligerence. You guys can take a drink. I saw someone saying, to drink every time Auron mentions co-belligerence. But this is something where you recognize a problem. The system as it exists is a problem. It is hindering both of your visions of the future in a way that is unacceptable. And so, to the extent in which you are unraveling that system or you're pushing against that system, then you can work together. But at the end, there has to be obviously a decision on which way we goes. But this is true of all, right? This is, Charles Haywood, who came up with the netter thing, has pointed this out many times. There are pagans on the right. There are Christian nationalists on the right. There are atheists on the right. There are, people who are reactionary. There are people who are for transhumanism. All this stuff has to get hashed out after you win. You got to win first. So first rule of political coalitions is win, and then figure that out. So I'm sure that there will be knockdown, drag out debates over all of that stuff. And even to be fair, the traditionalists, we're going to have to figure out how technology works. Like, we can't just go completely the Luddite route. Like, you're not just going to be able to destroy all of technology and just, go back to being, Amish people somewhere. So that vision is also just not going to happen. So there's some level of synthesis that's going to take place, or some level of adjustment that's going to take place. But the first problem is winning. That is a problem that's big enough for us to have to tackle before we get to any of the rest of it.
Yeah, that I would agree with Auron on this one. If you're not addressing the issue of how do you get the people that want to put a knife to your throat now versus the people that might put a knife to your throat 50 years from now, is an entirely separate question. And also, when these debates play out on the timeline, you get to usually witness that some of these people are either, secret leftists or have an entirely different agenda than what you initially thought that they were, or that the way that you might perceive their perspective was entirely different than how you originally had thought. And again, there are plenty of people who I am definitely inspired by, or that I respect, that I disagree with on a huge chunk of issues when it comes to the metaphysical, ontological questions. But I understand their perspective enough, and I can respect it enough to see how they've gotten to the conclusion that they're at. But I also know that I'd rather fight with that guy than the lefty that wants me to have my kids transed out.
Right. Like right now, at some point, Elon Musk might send his private security force to try to put a chip in my brain. And at that point, we'll have to come to blows. But right now, he's destroying the regime as it stands. And that's good enough for me. That's kind of where I've got to be at. And Robert Weinsfield just sends a super chat for $2 there. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. Oh, Hey Duke has one more here. Then it sounds like it's creating a new Franco regime if we win. How's that going? Yeah, well, again, that's the Spanish Civil War as a allegory that is not far off, and it is one that in which several different factions of the right had to kind of figure that out in order to be able to defeat the left at that time. So there are some parallels there.
Yeah, and there are other regimes as well that had the competency enough to start doing the knifing each other in the back thing only after they got power and virtue signaling how good they were. We can't even do that when we don't have power. So if we're not as confident as some of these Francoist or other regimes of the 20th and 19th centuries, then we have a lot of work to do on our own end organizationally. But again, it's going to be a matter of competence. I found it so funny that there was that article that came out by The Guardian or something, or The Telegraph, wherever, where it was noticing all of the people who were doing volunteer work for the hurricane relief were all, they called them like white supremacists or nationalists or whatever. And it's just like, sort of a pretty interesting, endorsement to illustrate that the government doesn't want to do these things because it targets the wrong people. And if all sorts of groups, whether it's the groups that they had mentioned or just volunteers like the Cajun Navy or whatever, all recognize that the government's not going to do its job to help the people it hates, well, then it's going to be a neat little tool where all these factions kind of come together and realize, no, there are greater things that matter here. Does it mean that there's going to be conflict? Oh, absolutely. But at the end of the day, that's something that's inevitable with any sort of political movement or evolution. It's just going to be who comes out on top. It's about competency, I think, at this point. Whoever can deliver the goods is going to be the one that you're going to probably deal with more.
Yeah, if you want to win the future, be effective. Like, win. If you're interested in your ideology becoming the dominant one, your faction becoming the dominant one, a really good way to do that is to win. if you're the one that's providing the logistics, if you're the one that's providing the political power, if you're the one that's providing the financial assets, then you get a lot of say in what the future looks like. So if your primary concern is how do I become a winning faction, try winning first. Like actually just be the most valuable player, be the one that is the funnel through which all effective tactics are being deployed, and then you're far more likely to be the one in charge at the end of the game. But again, as I encourage conservatives over and over again, stop rearranging the furniture in the mansion before you've made your first $5. Okay, like first you need to actually make a lot of money to buy the mansion. First you need to win the battle before you can then decide what the future is going to look like. Focus on the winning first. Okay. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Of course, please make sure to go check out the Prudentialist work. And if it's your first time on this channel, then you need to go ahead and subscribe, click the bell, turn on the notifications so you can catch us when we go live. If you'd like to catch any of the back streams, including the ones in this series, I build a lot of playlists. So if you want to look into Nick Land or Joseph de Maistre or Bertrand de Juvenal or Curtis Yarvin or many of the other thinkers that I've addressed at length on this channel, there's always a backlog of playlists there for you to explore the thought of each one of those thinkers, including Land. And of course, if you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to go to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre show there. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.